But I think this is also very central to where Teys see the future in the beef processing sector and the farming sector. And I was sort of very pleased to hear the previous speaker raise quite a number of issues that are pretty important to us as well. Just a bit of I suppose, the propaganda to start off with. This is our footprint. We've got 6 abattoirs down the eastern seaboard. We also have 3 feedlots. We've recently developed a trading arm within the US itself, which is probably our major customer. And we've actually now picked up wholesale outlets or a partnership, a joint venture with another group down in the eastern seaboard in the major cities to actually get us closer to our customers. One of our big concerns, and this is the thing that affects all of us, is this commodity cycle, and it's a pretty lurchy sort of thing as commodity cycles tend to be. And every now and again we can all be winners, and more often than not some are winners and some are losers, and that's just not, in our view, particularly good for the long-term sustainability of the industry. So we think there are things we can do about that to take out the peaks and troughs to a fair degree. So that's really what the talk is basically focusing on today. Just to give you an idea, one of the reasons we're pretty keen to get out of the commodity cycle, when you compare us to our major competitors, and keep in mind that 70% of the beef that we process in Australia is actually exported, we're pretty well trade exposed, and that gives you an idea of the labour costs compared to basically our competition overseas. We're pretty well ahead of pretty well anyone else, and that's just a conglomeration of everything that we have to pay when we employ people, and we don't think there's any value in arguing to basically change that in a sense, because we think there are other ways we can address that issue. Basically what we want to do, as the slide mentions, we want to reframe the debate. We want to make this more about consumers, what they want, what their preferences are, and how to deliver items they're prepared to pay a premium for. And we are in fact seeing quite a trend for that in Australia now. As you probably are already aware, pasture-fed assured beef is now fetching a better price than grain-fed beef in some consumer sectors. We're seeing an increasing demand out of North America for grass-fed, hormone-free beef. And in fact, we currently can't get enough raw supply to satisfy the demand. Mind you, that's a problem for probably most processors in most sectors, but there is a greatly increasing demand, and it's really driven by this view about organic, which I think is probably slightly misconstrued in a lot of consumers' minds. But in reality, well-husbanded grass-fed beef actually fulfills that demand pretty easily if we can get enough of it. There's quite a lot of research around the world that demonstrates consumers are willing to pay a premium for a consistent eating quality. And MSA has actually provided a fairly good basis and starting point down that road. But it does require that we give them consistently what they want and what they expect. And you'll see Teys and a number of our competitors within Australia are now developing very distinct branded lines and starting to market those branded lines fairly heavily. The supermarket chains are actually doing the same thing. And this is about satisfying the consumer at each and every eating experience. I think these slides too are available. I've given them to the Angus Society. I've got no problem if they sort of get distributed to anyone who needs them. We're a bit of a different manufacturing industry, and we often have trouble with government entities explaining this. We actually don't build stuff, we take it apart and sell off the bits. We actually, out of one animal, we've done a bit of just reviewing around plant operations. Out of one animal, we can supply bits out of that animal to almost 50 different countries, which can make the business fairly complex. And that's actually our problem. We sort of chose to use a non-meat thing, but Angus are probably down the bottom where the sports cars are. But we get all sorts of things coming at the front end, and trying to satisfy that consistent consumer demand, that is pretty difficult to do when the livestock sort of resemble that diversity. We see it less in the south, obviously. We see it a fair bit in the north, and we're working with producers in all those areas to try to make the item more consistent. The problem we actually have, and there's, as you will realise, there's been various inquiries, and there's currently an ACCC market survey trying to work out why the business is conducted the way it is. And it's pretty well because at different points in the supply chain, we're all measuring the attributes differently. In reality, the bottom line is we need to measure the attributes in a way that consumers measure them, because they're the ones that are ultimately paying the money. In a sense, the solution is pretty simple in theory. It takes a fair bit to deliver, as the previous speaker alluded to. Essentially, what we're after is a mixture of yield off the animal and quality of the individual cuts off the animal. And bear in mind that probably only 17 to 20% of those cuts are what we call sort of loin cuts. They're the high value items, you know, they're your rib fillets, they're your tenderloins, they're your strip loins. And then at the bottom end of the spectrum, about 37 to 40% of an animal actually goes into manufacturing, just won't end up anywhere other than a hamburger somewhere in the world. So it's a matter of trying to maximise, in a sense, both yield and quality. And there's sort of, for different breeds and different farming operations, there'll be, in a sense, a certain sweet spot where you turn animals off now. And that's one of the things we're trying to work with the supply chain to just identify where that actually is. It does require that all sectors of the supply chain work together, so we better understand what the customer wants, and we were able to provide that information back to farmers. There are quite a number of inquiries that are going on. There's an ag competitive white paper that makes some pretty good recommendations in this area. There's a review of the Australian beef language that again will be making, we believe, pretty reasonable recommendations in the area. There's also a Senate inquiry that's, I think at the moment you'd probably best describe as, you know, they've made some preliminary findings, but they're probably waiting to see what the ACCC market survey reveals, and probably seeing what the outcome of the next election is actually too, for that matter. But it does require that we basically come to a fairly uniform point of view about how we measure quality. We believe that it is based on a foundation of stronger supply chain relationships, as the previous speaker spoke about. It has to be built on trust. We have to try to develop a supply chain where every sector in most environments can basically win, if that's at all possible. We need to get away from some of the complicated trading languages we have, and we need to move towards things that better indicate the value of the animal back to the producer so they can make decisions about their breed selections and husbandry practices. And I'll talk a little bit, and I'll show you some examples. A lot of the current price grids that we use, or all the current price grids that we and our competitors use, are based on averages. So what a farmer gets back is a view about the average of the herd. The farmer doesn't get much information back about what's the best animal in that herd or that turn-off to slaughter around the quality and the yield. So the information doesn't really enable farmers to make good decisions about, you know, their own breeding programs. So basically what we're trying to do is move from a commodity-based process where we're just sort of hoping we get a good price for our livestock or our meat, whatever the market is, to one where we work with the whole supply chain and basically guarantee more consistent returns. Teys' position is we want to over time move to a value-based payment system to our farmers. And what I want to basically now talk about is the range we tend to see in mobs sent for slaughter. Even groups of animals that grade the same place in our grids have quite a degree of variation within them when you take them to basically a boning room or a retail level. So we've got as you will realise, we've got a normal distribution in all herds. You know, there's some good ones, some bad ones. And what we tend to find is that when we pay an average price for the group, you tend to see that it masks the better animals. It masks the values of those individual animals. Therefore, it basically doesn't allow farmers to understand which of their animals were in fact the better ones. And what you see in this chart, and we've got about 1.5 million records now from MSA graded animals. We grade about 60% of our kill at the moment. We're wanting to push it up. We'll eventually want to grade everything. Even if it's an old cow, we'll still want to get some idea what the quality parameters around that might have been. But what you see there, the orange line there really represents our normal grid payment. When we break the animals down and work out the values of the individual cuts from the same animals, we have some extremely valuable ones and we have some not so valuable ones. What we want to do is tell the farmer about those and those, so the farmer can make better decisions around the ones they keep to breed with. Same information probably represented a little bit differently. These are individual cohorts of animals. The farmer believed they were uniform. We thought they looked uniform as well in the yards. before slaughter. That's the grid average price. That's actually the average price we paid the farmer. That actually shows the spread within each of those groups of animals. And some of those spreads are as big as $700. So, you know, ideally everyone would like to produce the one that's worth $700 more. In the short term, that won't be possible, but in the long term, we're hoping we can get there. And they're the ones that basically have high quality, better graded cuts, and they're the ones that also yield reasonable amounts of manufacturing beef off those same animals. And the spread is going to be different for different farmers in different locations. The North Queensland spread, there's obviously a bit more manufacturing beef come off those animals than some of the southern animals, and it's something that I think genetic improvement could probably fix over time, but that will be a sort of a slower process. What we need to do is build it on a system that objectively measures carcasses as seen by the consumer. The current carcass grading systems are okay, but they do rely on people wandering around in chillers late at night with torches and colour grading chips and all sorts of things. And even with the best of intent, and these people are actually calibrated fairly regularly by Osmeat, they're calibrated by an internet-based system as well, pretty regularly, in a testing process they must pass. But even with that, there's still tremendous variation because you're involving people. So there's quite a lot of work going on that MLA are doing. I'll point to a few articles later, but the Minister announced some funding from the Rural R&D for Profit program around objective carcass measurement. MLA will coordinate that work, but we're looking at better ways of more objectively measuring using cameras, some pretty fancy looking X-ray gear that actually sounds fancy but is not that expensive. We're actually validating the X-ray machine with CAT scans. And curiously enough, they're not that expensive these days. You can buy a half-decent one out of the US for about $100,000. The only problem is they don't work real fast. So if you're killing about 5 a day, you know, that'll work. Basically what we're looking at doing is adapting some technologies used in the security industry around X-raying product, you know, producing three-dimensional images. And that's the systems actually will go live, I think, for sheep this year. We think beef's probably 2 or 3, maybe at worst 4 years away. So there's work going on that. But essentially trying to get that, work out the balance of the carcass, where the better cuts are, how much of them there is, and where the manufacturing beef is. That technology will also drive to a fair degree robotics eventually, because it can pick up the cuts and the cutting lines, and it can probably do that far more accurately than a group of boners. That too is a fair way off, but all this work will drive it in that direction. The other thing that we're doing as part of this, and Teys are doing this particularly, but there are other companies that are getting into this, and this is this animal health surveillance. There's quite a lot of information that may not directly relate to whether an animal is fit for human consumption or not, but it definitely relates to the yield of the animal and how healthy they were at the time of slaughter. We've got some projects that we will start going live with within a couple of months where we'll be feeding that information back to farmers. We'll be talking to MLA about the best way in an extension sense to provide that information in a meaningful way, so we're not scaring people with what we send back. But hopefully that will then point to some improvements, and we believe out of that $700 spread, probably 200 or 300 of that's probably related to animal health. So in a sense, could very well be low-hanging fruit, and we could very well get some very quick advantage out of that. What we're doing on all our sites, we'll be forming little focus groups of farmers where we will give them their grid price. So this is what we pay you now. We will actually tell them what their value-based marketing price could be based on some of this technology that will be gradually rolling out. And we'll also give them animal health information and just see if the information we provide and how it's provided is useful to them. So that's sort of, and we'll be doing that over the next 6 or 12 months. We've been working with MLA on some extension campaigns around our abattoirs, so we're going out and having field days with farmers and updating them about where we're at with these particular projects. So that, to me, I'm a vet by initial training, as you probably gathered, so that I find that sort of stuff pretty exciting because I can relate to that fairly directly, and I think there are some quite good opportunities there for us to do that. But the key to all of this is basically accurate and relevant feedback, linking farmers more directly with customers. So, as I said earlier, providing them the true value of the animal, so the farmer can then work out why the good ones are good and why the bad ones aren't so good. how they can instigate continuous improvement, and those clear price signals we hope will make a fairly big change to a farmer's behaviour around their breeding programs and their husbandry programs. I've got a little slide there. I did contemplate changing it before today about dairy being a valid example. It probably still is a valid example in the genetic improvement context. In 1980, the average production of a dairy cow per year was about 2,800 litres of milk. In 2012, it's now 5,891, and it's probably higher now. So basically, the message there: if you ran a 1980s beef herd today, you would be well and truly gone by now. And we think that type of genetic improvement, maybe not that extreme, but is definitely available to the beef farmer. Part of this is moving from our traditional carcass-based process, and we can put that to history. As I said earlier, we've learned an awful lot out of MSA, and it's been and we'll keep learning out of MSA, and the science will keep, and consumer surveys will keep informing us and moving that whole discussion around objective carcass measurement forward. And they can actually be quite complicated. And a lot of those parameters that are currently measured under the AusMeat language bear no relevance, we now know, to meat quality. So although the world understands that language has been adopted in quite a few countries. Brazil do it, New Zealand do it. The US have a very, very similar system for those of you that have been through the States. So it's used quite broadly, so there'll be, I suppose, a fair bit of tradition we might need to gradually sort of dismantle and rebuild, around something that looks a little bit more like MSA. We basically, that thing there is one of our grids. I say one because there's more than one. They're quite highly complicated. They're full of, this is what we'll pay you for this. This is a penalty of, A, B, C, D, and E happen. We actually think the grid could very well be more simple, based around the quality of those loin cuts plus, the lean meat yield off that individual carcass. And there'll be certain premiums that will automatically be added. EU's pretty good. PCAS is actually pretty good at the moment. Angus is pretty good at the moment. It's as someone mentioned earlier, the previous speaker, those differences have been squeezed a little bit, but they're still there. So we think that whole thing can get far simpler, and a farmer can basically anticipate pretty reliably the sort of returns their livestock will get. Just quickly, as I mentioned earlier, the Minister did announce some funding for Objective Carcass Measurement Project that MLA will basically be overseeing. Murdoch University will be the leading researcher in that process. But I think that's very encouraging. I think this will give us better farm gate returns. And this, very simply, is where we see the future. What we want to do is gradually move that, that normal distribution that you're probably all aware of. We want to move it. We want to improve it, and we want to squeeze the standard deviation or the differences down so we're getting better, more consistent livestock off all farms. The Teys are making a fairly big commitment to this. We think this is the future. We think this is the future for our business. So we've been sort of moving down this road now for a couple of years. We still think there's probably 3 or 4 more years to go, and it will keep evolving as we learn more.